Hey everybody, it's Elaine, and today I'm back with Jeremy. We're going to be discussing our favorite standalone novels today and ranking them in an attempt to find the best one. Because why not? So, before we start our main conversation and discussion, I'd like to ask what contributes to your enjoyment of a novel? What keeps you from putting that book down?
Um, I mean, the kind of like the things we went over last week. The characters have to be really strong. Strong characters are kind of arguably the most important thing to a book, in my opinion, because you can have falters in the plot but still follow the characters. What I've noticed when I was kind of going through my top books, standalone books at the very least, is the recurrence of atmosphere being really important, like the how the author uses the setting and the writing style to kind of immerse you in the world. I feel like I need that more in standalone books than I need it in series, because the series are really carried by the characters. But I really need a good atmosphere and a good world that gets you in and pulls you in and holds you there really quickly, because you're only going to get that one book.
That's true. I think I agree with a lot of that. Typically, I'm a fantasy person. I'm stuck in reality all day. Don't need reality when I'm reading. Just saying. Definitely need a well-developed world. There's some that are kind of messy and confusing because obviously this isn't a real place. Sometimes fantasy is set in the real world, but for the most part, a lot of fantasy books seem to be set in these kind of alternate universes, dystopian locations, and sometimes if they're not described well, they just don't make sense. And then I'm saying bye-bye to that book because I'm confused. And then I'd agree with you. I think that it's important to have strong characters, not necessarily like physically strong, but like well-rounded people, like a host of characters that all have a unique voice and a unique look and a unique personality, where it's not like I'm basically reading one character with different names for the entire novel, which has happened a lot. It's kind of surprising and sad.
Yeah. I feel like growth is important too.
Yeah, growth is important.
Like you need to show actual growth throughout the book. You have a small amount of time relatively to show that arc, and you kind of have to have a complete arc. If you don't, then it's like it feels like you're missing something.
That's true. Yeah, static main characters are no good. That's an issue too. Don't do it. Don't do it. All right. So now that we've pretty much settled that, I feel, why don't we get into the heart of our discussion here? Let's rank some books and talk about them.
Okay.
You want me to start this week?
Yeah, you can get started.
So I'm going to be lame and read you a synopsis off the back of the book, or I'm assuming what's the synopsis off the back of the book. I don't actually have a physical copy to confirm or deny, but it's going to be Holes, probably my favorite childhood book. Fun fact. The synopsis is Stanley Yelnats is under a curse that began with his no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather, and his hints follow generations of Yelnatses. Now Stanley has been unjustly sent to a boys' detention center, Camp Green Lake, where the boys build character by spending all day, every day, digging holes exactly 5 feet wide and 5 feet deep. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake, but there are an awful lot of holes. It doesn't take long for Stanley to realize there's more than character improvement going on at Camp Green Lake. The boys are digging holes because the warden is looking for something. But what could be buried under the dried up lake? So, why do I like this book so much? It's really unique. I don't feel like there's anything with the synopsis even remotely close to this. And that's always exciting. I feel like it's hard to find books that feel different, especially now. This is actually one of the few books that I've read in my life multiple times willingly. I think I'm up to 4 times now.
Okay.
I really like this book, guys. You should read it if you haven't already. I'm assuming most of you guys have. It's pretty popular.
We've seen the Shia LaBeouf adaptation.
Not as good. Read the book, guys. Movie is no bueno. Sorry, Shia. So sorry. This is also a book I felt like was appropriate for the intended audience, which is young adults. Like I read a few books, just to throw it out what they're like. Becky Albertalli's The Upside of Unrequited, which is also a YA novel, but didn't seem appropriate for that age group at all. There was, tons of cursing, glamorizing of, risky behavior like drinking underage, tons of discussions of sex, which, might be okay for someone who's like 16, 17, 18 on the higher end of like that YA quote traditional cutoff. But for someone who's 12 or 13, definitely not something that most parents would feel comfortable having their children reading. But I felt like this was good for everyone within that age bracket.
Yeah.
There's minimal cursing. I think there are like 1 or 2 instances, which in the grand scheme of things isn't much. There wasn't anything like sex or too much violence or anything that was too graphic, like anything that just didn't seem appropriate for everyone within the age group, and I thought that was pretty great. I was like a fast read. It's, relatively short. It's fast paced, which is everything you like in a YA novel. And I felt like all the characters have a unique voice. They're, you can distinguish between them without really having to think about who they are if you're not told who's speaking. They all have their own personalities. They're relatable. Like, for example, Stanley is overweight. A lot of kids deal with, quote, the shame. I don't like to say it like that, but people are shamed for being overweight. And it's been a while since I read it. I think to some extent he was, and, that's something that's relatable for a lot of people. He's also really unlucky. He always seems to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's something that a lot of people deal with too, and just not having a good day sometimes. So I really liked that. And that's really all I have to say on that one. It's a good book. Go read it. Read it. You'll thank me.
If you didn't already read it in grade school or middle school, you probably...
Even that, just read it again. It's a good book.
I did. I read it back when I was in middle school, and I honestly don't remember very much from it. And then I saw the movie.
It's not as good.
But it seemed like an interesting story, and I know you were pushing my son to read it
because it's amazing.
Okay, so mine aren't in any particular order, but I'm going to start off with the one that I think I'm going to get the most flack for, and that is this book right here, Ready Player One. There's this kind of I don't know. Since the movie came out, there's a little bit of a backlash against this book, where I feel like people are kind of trashing it a lot, and it's not the most tightly written book in the world. It's really not. The language that's used in it is kind of simplistic. The subject matter is kind of niche, but I feel like if you fall into the niche that this book is trying to appeal to, it's one of the best ones out there for hitting the subject matter that you like. I'll do a little summary. I can read the back of the book. In the year 2044, reality is an ugly place. The only time teenager Wade Watts really feels alive is when he's jacked into the virtual utopia known as the Oasis. Wade's devoted his life to studying the puzzles hidden within this world's digital confines. Puzzles that are based on their creator's obsession with the pop culture of decades past and that promise massive power and fortune to whoever can unlock them. But when Wade stumbles upon the first clue, he finds himself beset by players willing to kill to take this ultimate prize. The race is on, and if Wade's going to survive, he'll have to win and confront the real world he's always been so desperate to escape. It's the ultimate book about escapism. It really is kind of escapism, the book. There's a little bit of, you wasted a lot of time on pop culture and playing video games and listening to, I guess none of these things are wastes of time, but if you are you authority figures view my consumption of music and pop culture and 80s trivia as waste of time. Look, now I'm going to get a lot of money because I know all that stuff. So I do like the nostalgia as the tail end of the 80s. I was born in 87, but I had a mom who was very big into 80s stuff, like bands and TV shows and things like that. She's
still into it.
Yeah, she's still into it. She watches watches all the old stuff more than she watches the modern stuff. And so I got a lot of the references, and I liked getting a lot of the references. It's really just a long nostalgia trip, and it's actually, I don't reread books very often. This is one of, I think, 4 books or so that I've actually gone through twice, and twice is big for me.
Yeah, he's a less frequent rereader than me, but even I'm infrequent, so this is a big deal. Yeah,
it's a really quick read too. It's a very simplistic book. But I will say it's not for everyone. If you're somebody who is like a younger reader, you're not going to get a lot of the references because a lot of them are pretty deep cut. It's not super well known stuff, and there's stuff that like I had to look up like what they were, but they do it. If you get any of the little references, is a lot. You don't have to do tons of research or anything. They do a decent job of explaining it. But yeah, the characters were decent. It was a fun read. I liked it.
I did too.
Yeah,
I read it. It was good.
And the movie adaptation doesn't do it justice. So if that's your only exposure to it, go read the book.
Let's be honest. The adaptation is terrible. It's nothing like the book, and you should just read the book.
Yeah.
That's my advice, me to you. Not that I'm biased or anything, because everyone knows I prefer books, but go with the book.
That also had one of the most interesting moments I ever had in a movie going experience, where I literally leaned over to my sister who I was watching the movie with, and oh, okay, we're leaving the movie behind now. I mean, the book behind. They completely jumped the shark in the middle of the movie, and it's like, oh, wow, that wasn't in the book at all.
Yeah, not a good one. Alrighty, guys, it's back. It's Nimona. For those of you who maybe didn't watch it yet, we talked about this a few weeks ago, so I'm going to try to make it brief. Just going to read the back to you guys. It says, Nimona is an impulsive young shapeshifter with a knack for villainy. Lord Ballister Blackheart is a villain with a vendetta. As sidekick and supervillain, Nimona and Lord Blackheart are about to wreak some serious havoc. Their mission, prove to the kingdom that Sir Ambrosius Goldenloin and his buddies at the Institution of Law Enforcement and Heroics aren't the heroes everyone thinks they are. Nemesis, dragons, science, symbolism. All these and more await in this brilliantly subversive, sharply irreverent epic from Noelle Stevenson, based on her award-winning webcomic. Okay, so what do I like about this? It's a pretty funny novel. It pokes fun at, common fantasy tropes. Even the names, I don't know why I said Noins. I had Golden Loin on my mind. That's what that was. Are kind of funny. I mean, Golden Loin for like the last part of it, like that's kind of amusing in a weird, very childish way. But
all of the people involved with that are named involved with the institute have like crotch references as their names.
Pretty much, it's a thing. It's pretty amusing. So I liked that there were tons of likable and relatable characters. For example, Blackheart is misunderstood. Most people are in some way misunderstood about some aspect of their personality and or life. He's labeled a villain, but he's really not a bad person. Nimona is also impulsive. She's really funny. She's, sarcastic, always poking fun at her boss. And she is really enthusiastic about her job, which is kind of exciting. I don't know a lot of people who are enthusiastic about their jobs, especially someone who she seems like a teenager, so I'm going to say teenager. So that's pretty interesting. It was also really fast paced. There's tons of stuff going on all the time. There's never a dull moment. And I really like that it was one of those novels that was, thought provoking, but not too thought provoking, where it's like, okay, this is a bit much. It makes you think about what's good and evil, and it kind of leaves it at that. And it entertains you all, reading, which I liked. I read this one a few times too. It's good.
It had enough themes and symbolism and thought-provoking subject to inspire another video that you've already done in the past, which we talked about it for a while.
We did.
The artwork is really nice. It's very simplistic and like hand drawn, but I really liked the fact that artwork fits the style of the book. Like, I feel like more polished artwork kind of wouldn't work. Like, if you see like modern comic book art, I don't think it would work with the story. I think the story kind of requires the type of artwork that was used in it. And I think it was a stylistic choice more than it was like a limitation or anything like that. Because the other works by the same, by Noelle Stevenson, was it Lumberjanes?
Yeah, but she works with a group for that one.
I know the artwork's similar though.
Yeah,
kind of in Foundation, and it's a really good story. Like, and it looks like a big book. Like when you pick it up, you're like, oh, this is a really long comic book, but you go through it so quickly. Like you don't want to stop reading it. It's a really good story and really good characters. So that's gotta rank up there high.
It's good.
Okay, my next one is I have a couple I could go with. Let's go with Warbreaker next. Warbreaker is one of only, I think, 3 books that's officially a standalone book that was written by Sanderson.
But he's changing his mind on
Yeah,
that.
yeah. He it's one of the few times where I've seen author bow to public pressure and be like, "We want a sequel," and now he's like, "Oh, many years later, I'm going to write a sequel for it because people really wanted one," and it left off in a spot where you wanted a sequel. Um, the It was a while that I read this book, like a while ago, but
Me too.
so I don't have a super in-depth synopsis of it, but the general idea behind the book was that there was these beings that were like called the Returned, and they were like gods that came back, and they came back onto the mortal plane, and they're kind of like held above everybody else. And there was like the main character Vasher has like the sentient sword, and he's trying to I don't know, bring back the king or something, bring like avenge the king. Can't remember exactly what the plot was, but I remember I liked it because of the magic system. That was probably the biggest thing that it had going for it, and that's usually a high up trait for Sanderson novels. He's really good at designing unique magic systems, and the one in this was they had something called breath, which was basically the soul of a person, but it literally was like breath, and it could be willingly given to um, other people, and that would turn them into drabs, which were like people that didn't have souls. They were like walked around with like no personality, and they were really empty.
Borderline zombies.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
But this book actually does have zombies. They're called lifeless. But
Well, then that's just confusing.
Well, so drabs are living people that lost their breath, and lifeless are corpses that are animated using other people's breath, and you can bring them back. And they're like used as unskilled labor. Like they use them to carry stuff and to like
Why not?
hold those like things
Standards.
that it's the thing that important people sit in.
Those
like
chair
the
things,
chair
yeah.
things. Yeah.
Palanquin, maybe?
I was gonna say that, but I didn't want to sound stupid if it was the wrong word.
It might be the wrong word.
Yeah.
Don't quote us.
Yeah. But the main like mechanic around the breath is something called awakening, which is where you can use breath to animate objects, and you do that by draining the color of other things around you. So you'll be like, I'm gonna touch this wall, and this wall is now like gray. That color goes into the object that you're trying to animate, and you speak a command word, and you'd be like, say you want to the main character animates his like scarf thing, like tassels a lot, and he'll use it to grab stuff. He'll be like grab, and he'll use his breath, and that'll go into the scarf, and the scarf will like grab somebody's leg or whatever, or he uses to like swing and lower himself. But that's kind of cool. Like it's different from all of his other magic systems, and the way that they use it in really creative ways. That the stuff that they animate is cool. Like he animates different parts of his clothing and like different objects to make them do different things. And the way that he integrates it into fighting, which is I'm always kind of astounded when I look at Sanderson's writing and how he does fight scenes, and the way that he takes these really like minutely detailed magic systems and works them seamlessly into fights. While not losing track of everything. It always kind of amazes me. But the thing that kind of holds Warbreaker back from being like a top book for me is the fact that it does end on a spot where you're like, I mean, I'm not gonna say it, but it ends on a spot where you're like, that doesn't seem like the end of a story.
Yeah.
Like they live like it's like a cliffhanger on a show, and you're like, but I want to know what happens next. But you're saying this is a standalone book, but that doesn't seem like it follows the rules. And the characters weren't super the characters weren't super enthralling for the book. Like they were okay, but they weren't. I liked the returned character that they focused on, one of the POV characters. I liked him because he had personality, but Vasher, who was the protagonist, I didn't really like him all that much. He was kind of boring, but the magic system and the kind of the story around it, that kind of carried it through for me.
The other thing too was this is still I think one of his earlier works, but it wasn't the first. Elantris I think is his first novel, and if you look at the prose just from like a writing standpoint, it's very clunky. It's not seamless. It's like obviously Sanderson grew as a writer, and when you look at that book and compare it to something like Warbreaker or his newer works like A Way of Kings, you see a difference. This one's somewhere in the middle, so
Yeah.
stylistically, it's a lot stronger. And he really starts to come into his own about, I guess, this novel, maybe the one that comes after it.
That's kind of
Which
what
is
you hear
good.
from people, because the other one that takes place on, it's one of the few ones that actually have multiple series that take place on the same world in the Cosmere, because Emperor's Soul took place in the same world as Warbreaker, and that I've never actually read Emperor's Soul, but I've heard bad things.
You're not missing out.
Yeah.
It won an award, but I don't agree with it. It was not a good one.
I mean, I think a lot of the problem is people will compare, like you were just saying about his writing style, kind of advancing as he goes on, and people will compare things like Warbreaker, Elantris, and Emperor's Soul to the more popular things that they know him from later on, like Mistborn and Stormlight Archives, and they go, "Oh, this is not good by his standards."
Oh, it's not even by his standard. It's just a bad book. Like nothing really seemed to happen. It was making like these things to make like a soul for an emperor. It's like literally all in the title. But it was just so slow. It was like 100 some odd pages of just doing one simple task with like minute details. And it's like, I don't care. You can accomplish this in like 20 pages. We're good.
Yeah,
so.
and I read Elantris, and that didn't make my top standalone books because of like what we were talking about, like the language, the prose wasn't very good, and the magic system. It didn't click. It's probably the only one that doesn't click with me.
I don't even remember it having.
It had something to do with like drawing symbols in the air, and like there used to be gods, and the gods like vanished. But and then like they had all these remnants from that previous society, and they didn't know how to use them. But like I didn't really understand the magic system, like drawing the runes, and it wasn't as tightly ruled because it was his first. It wasn't as tightly ruled as all the other ones later on, where you literally could have a chart that explained the magic system.
Yeah.
Interesting thing, a little side note on Warbreaker is he actually, while he was writing it, released all of the drafts to the public for free to read, all of his like notes, all of his processes and everything, and that was like against his agent and the Tor Publishing's word. They're like, no, don't do that. You don't want them to see all that. And he's like, no, I want them to see my process, which is kind of cool. It's confidence.
Yeah. We also digressed a bit.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Moving on. You ready to go?
Yeah, what's your next one?
All right. People are going to look at me funny, but Dracula's amazing. Okay? Good old Bram Stoker there. It's literally the only good thing he's written. I've tried to read his other stuff. Just go with Dracula. Anyway, Dracula tells the story of Dracula's attempt to move from Transylvania to England in order to find a new feeding ground and essentially spread the curse of vampirism. All right. And obviously his efforts are tracked and countered by a group of men and women led by Abraham Van Helsing, which I feel like is the only other name you ever know from this book. Yeah. Anyway, so some reasons why I like this book. Vampires are adversely affected by sunlight, like they're supposed to be. That's not always the case. There's some other book that, doesn't do that.
Twilight. Talked about it last week.
Yeah, that. So I liked that. This novel is also interesting because it's told from multiple perspectives and always through things like letters, journals, newspaper clippings, which I think works really well. This is I believe it's a Victorian novel. It's Gothic style. It's a horror story, and telling the story through these different like snippets of information and sources of information adds suspense because it's never told from Dracula's perspective. It's always the other characters that are chasing him, like Mina and Jonathan, and I think Van Helsing even. It's been a while since I read it. And they have to speculate about what's going on. Like, there's something weird that happens. They think it's Dracula. They're not really sure if it's Dracula, but they're assuming it's Dracula. Or maybe his, I guess it would be called the Thrall. Renfield might be his thrall. His servant. We'll just call it a servant. It's easier.
It's human, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, thrall.
I don't know if that's the term he actually uses, but let's go with that. And I also liked it because a lot of the time when you look at these kinds of novels, if you get to hear more from the monster, from the monster's perspective, they become someone that we can sympathize with, which can be nice, but then you don't really view them as a monster anymore, which kind of defeats the purpose of the book. Like at the end of Frankenstein, for example, spoilers, like you sympathize with the monster a bit. Like he, feels bad for what he did. And it's like, well, I can't really view you as a monster anymore.
Right, you're humanizing them. So then.
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't happen with Dracula. He's just this guy who makes some very questionable decisions that humans don't agree with. And he's bad. And it's, simple. It's a monster story. And that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I liked that. And the fact that also he doesn't actually exist in most of the novel. Dracula isn't in most of the narration. He's in a very minute portion. That also adds suspense because we don't constantly see what he's doing. We're also guessing along with the other characters, which I liked. I thought it was well written. I mean, obviously the style is very different than what we would see now because this is an older novel, but all things considered, I thought it was fairly well written. Maybe a little too detailed for some modern readers or a little awkward language-wise, but I thought it was good. I also liked how this didn't become like a horror romance. I feel like that's a thing that happens a lot. You have some sort of horror story and then the author is like, well, I need to temper this with something, and then they just throw in this romance. Yeah, that doesn't really happen here. Obviously, Mina and Jonathan are, in a relationship, and you do see some of that. But it doesn't become the main point of the novel, almost to the detriment of the goal of the story, which is to tell a horror story. So like that. And I thought that it had a good amount of build up before delivering all the action. Like there wasn't too much, there wasn't too little. It was a decent pace, especially for an older novel, which operates by some different rules than what we see now. And that's all. It's a good book. You should read it.
Yeah, I mean, it gets. I have the. I was recently gifted the Audible version.
Who got me that?
You got me that.
Yeah, I know.
For my my Audible collection, so it's on my very soon to be read or listened to list. It gets bonus points for setting a lot of the vampire mythos.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that we know about vampires or are portrayed in pop culture about vampires came from Dracula. Obviously a lot of them came from myths and things, and that's where his ideas came from, but they're solidified in the collective consciousness from Dracula. It's had some iconic movie performances too, like adaptations of Dracula are very well known and very well respected. Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee.
He's epic.
I like the Gary Oldman version, but nobody else does. So. But
excuse me while I choke.
I had to say, some of the later adaptations of Dracula always kind of detract from the source material because they try and they do that humanizing aspect that you were talking about. That was actually a positive to you in the book. A lot of them try to humanize Dracula. I feel like not the Bela Lugosi or the Christopher Lee. They kind of portray him as that creeping dread. But there's you had even was it Dracula Untold, which was
there are too many Dracula.
Yeah, it was one of the newer ones. It's supposed to be a dark universe movie, and it was he had to do this. He was being invaded and blah blah blah. He took on these powers, but yeah, I definitely think that it's got to be up there, and it has earned its right as a classic, definitely, from everything I know about it.
Much better than Frankenstein. Sorry, Mary Shelley, didn't do it for me. All right, what do you have for me now?
I feel like I always end up with more than you.
Well, yeah, you like things a lot more than I do. I'm very picky.
My standards are low. I'm going to follow up your gothic horror book with a modern gothic horror book. Well, it's not modern. It's 1992. I guess it's
modern-ish.
Yeah, modern-ish. Gothic horror book, which is probably my top book that I put on my list. And it's Lost Souls by Poppy Z. Bright. Poppy Z. Bright was an author that did mystery books, I want to say is her primary focus. And she stepped out and she wrote a couple of short stories and some full-length books that were gothic horror. And you had Lost Souls, Drawing Blood, and Wormwood. I've read all three of them. I like Lost Souls the most. I've actually read it all the way through, not even listened to it the second time, read it all the way through twice. Drawing Blood was pretty good. It had an interesting concept. But Lost Souls was probably one of the most formative books for me. I read it back in high school, and it was right when I was starting to. I was in my phase where I was starting to write. I was writing poetry and I was writing like little short stories and things like that, and starting to be creative. And it really spoke to me. It's a book about it's a vampire book. The vampires in that are very different. They're like a separate species. You can't turn somebody into a vampire. Vampires are born, and some of the rules apply. There's like as you get older, they have like naturally sharper teeth, and they can't eat food when they're older. But younger vampires can still eat human food. They can go out in the sunlight. Um, they can breed with humans and make like half breed vampires. They're not really half breed. I guess they're vampires more than they are human, but they can breed with humans. Because one of the characters in the book, whose actually name is Nothing, that's actually what he goes by. It's very existential and nihilistic. It's amazing. And he is the son of one of the vampires in the book. Unbeknownst to him, that's what like kind of his whole quest is, to find his real family. um the biggest thing that like I mentioned earlier was like atmosphere is a huge thing in this book. It sets a like this southern gothic tone to it throughout the whole thing. Like everything seems to take place at night, and she does such a wonderful job of describing the scenery and describing the scenes in like broad like artistic strokes. Almost like she really paints a scene, and that none of the viewers will have seen it, but Elaine has seen my writing, and like she can see that's very where my writing style kind of came from. Is very kind of like broad artistic kind of descriptions, fluttery and fluffy. She was always so good at that, and I wish she had written more books in this genre because she was like a very unique voice. The places that she describes, some of them are real, some of them are fictional. Some of it takes place in New Orleans. Some of this it takes place in this town in Florida called Two Eggs, which I actually didn't realize was a real place until I looked it up. And it's actually a real place in Florida. But the main setting for the beginning of the book, especially, is this, and it's also for Drawing Blood, is this place called Missing Mile, North Carolina. And I wanted to go there so bad, and it's not a real place. And I looked it up, but it's so amazingly described. It's just like a couple of streets in a town, but the way that they make it seem so lived in, and she paints this settings with so much life. The characters are all kind of I want to say brooding, but not really brooding. Not brooding to the point where they're like talking about the fact that they're brooding, but very, very introspective. The POVs change per chapter. The three main characters would be Steve, Ghost, and Christian, and Nothing. Four main characters, and they're all kind of having their own journeys, and they all like it all comes together in New Orleans, and then there's like that's where the whole plot happens. It's an amazing book. I couldn't recommend it highly enough, honestly. And I actually got it on Audible, and I'm gonna listen to it. This is my third time through.
Yeah.
First time.
That's kind of a big deal. Alrighty. So, gonna go back to yesteryear, talk about this lovely novella. Sorry, guys. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Basically, it's a science fiction novel by H.G. Wells. It was published in 1895 and written as a frame narrative. The work is generally credited with the popularization of the concept of time travel by using a vehicle that allows the operator to travel purposely and selectively forward or backward in time. So, obviously, this isn't really innovative by today's standards, but for the time it was written, it was very innovative. It created the idea of the time machine and time travel, pretty much. Definitely the time machine, not as much time travel. It's a fast read, obviously. This is, pretty dinky, thin novel here, which is fine. It's fine. Liked it. I thought it was well written. Again, obviously, this is from, more of a Victorian age, so the style is a little different, but considering what it was and what it is, it's pretty strong. I had a hard time putting it down. It was pretty fast paced, especially for this time period where novels tend to drag a little bit. And it really made you think. It made you question your view on society and where society might be going. And it created a world in the future where you could see this happening. You could see society progressing into the Eloi and the Morlocks becoming these people that were they're not really at war, but they have conflicts with each other because the Morlocks are eating the LOI, and that's kind of an issue for them at least. Um, yeah, I just felt like it was strong. It wasn't one of those books that made you overthink. It wasn't really confusing. It's pretty straightforward, and it's entertaining. I like that. The only thing is, I don't believe it ever named the narrator, and I kind of would have liked to see that. I find novels that don't name everybody a little disorienting. Um, but I really don't have anything bad to say about it.
Was the POV character the one using the time machine?
Yeah, it's told from the perspective of the man using the time
And
machine.
they never named him.
I don't believe so. No, could be wrong on that, guys. Might have been mentioned in brief, but I am pretty positive.
Like him as?
No, actually, it's not the
time traveler.
So it won't be convenient to speak of him as expounding a recondite matter to us. Yeah. So I lied. It's not told from his perspective. But then it goes on to say, in another moment, we were standing face to face, I and this fragile thing out of futurity, which is a very awkward word. But that could be why I got confused. So I guess
it's like quotes. Some of the chapters are in quotes.
It's kind of okay.
Interesting.
So there might be a perspective change. It's been a while since I read this, but what are you gonna do? That's really all I have on that one.
I think that's another one that gets bonus points for being like the first of something. You like those progenitor kind of novels.
What can I say? I'm a classy reader, Jer.
I mean, time machines they gave us a lot after that. It's a very important thing to have established into, especially science fiction. It's one of those pillar stories of science fiction. I think everybody's heard of it. I've seen the movie again, which I know is very different. I know it's very different, but had Guy Pearce in it. He's okay. He was good in Memento. It was the same director, actually.
Not a fan of Memento, but we digress.
Yeah, I mean, it's on my list.
You should read it.
Yeah.
I encourage you.
I see it's short. Let me get through that real quick.
I mean, yeah, it's like, hold on, guys. It's not even 100 pages. It's short, kids.
It's shorter than The Hobbit.
The Hobbit's like 300 some odd pages.
Oh, I thought it was like 100 something.
What have you been smoking?
Listen,
no.
Okay, so my last official top pick book is it's another horror book, and
Surprises.
I've mentioned it on prior streams a couple of times actually. I think for the adaptation, definitely is The Shining.
Surprise!
The Shining is a very good book, and that's all you need to know. No, but it's about a family that gets hired on, or the father gets hired on to be a caretaker at a hotel in Colorado, the Overlook, and it turns out that the hotel has a past, and it starts messing with the family, and most specifically with the father. I think everybody pretty much knows the foundation behind The Shining at this point, whether you've seen the movies or the miniseries that wasn't very good, or read the book. The cool thing about The Shining is I go back to atmosphere. Like it uses atmosphere as a character, which is something I haven't really seen in anything else really. The hotel is basically a character. You get to know kind of its quirks, you get to know like its characteristics, you see it almost has moods, and the way that they describe the this setting is, you could definitely see it comes from a place that King really appreciated the place that he was staying at. He stayed at like an actual hotel out in Colorado that he based the story off of, and the story is written. If you've seen the Kubrick adaptation, it's a different hotel than the one that's in that. The one that's in the Kubrick adaptation is a lot bigger and there's a lot more space, and that kind of lends to this sense of claustrophobia that you get from the book as well. But the place that he actually stayed at was a much smaller, like kind of more claustrophobic in an actual sense hotel. It was like a lodge kind of thing, but he describes it with such like love behind it that it definitely affected him. Like he had a creative inspiration while he was staying there, and the way that they kind of, you go through the whole book kind of with this, is it real, is it not real kind of um, thing about it. Like the background, you never really get full confirmation on what's in the characters' heads and what's in reality, and the different types of spirits that inhabit the place, the different imagery. It's the only book that I've read that genuinely scared me while I was reading it. I read it back in high school, and I just have the distinct memory. I was sitting in my living room in the armchair in the corner of my room with a lamp on above me and reading this scene where they're describing the red rum, the original red rum scene from the book, which is very played up in the movie. And I remember getting up, turning on the light in the kitchen, turning on the light across the room, and turning on the light in the hallway just so I could sit back down and finish reading the book, because it builds that kind of an atmosphere so well. And there's a lot of time where there's, like, I would call it dead time in any other book where there's not a lot happening, but it builds that suspense so well that dead time kind of lends itself to building towards the pinnacle. The characters are great. Even the secondary characters, the spiritual aspect to it is well described enough, but not described to death, which is really good. Like The Shining is kind of described, but kind of left really mysterious. The hotels kind of described, but kind of left mysterious. And I think there's no other horror book that really kind of does what this one does. That's why I hold it so high.
I'm out of books.
You're out of books?
Are we
doing the honorable mentions?
Did you want to make a quick honorable mention before we rank everything?
A couple of honorable mentions that we've both read. American Gods and The Night Circus. We actually have The Night Circus here.
It's a pretty book. It's
a very beautifully done cover. And that cover is kind of a microcosm of the whole book. The book is very beautifully put together, the way that they describe things. Like, the characters are really well done, and the scenery is described with a lot of care.
Some of the best prose I've seen in a long time, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's very strong prose.
It had a he's not a primary character of the book, but the clockmaker is one of my favorite characters ever in a book. He's not a complex character, but just something about him made him a character that I really loved in the book, and he's not even a main character.
No.
Yeah, that's a really good book. I would definitely recommend it.
We gave no information, and that's fine.
Yeah, you don't need to. Yeah, it's actually better that you go into that book blind, because it's hard to explain the plot, and I feel like explaining the plot would almost ruin it. So, if you really try to dig into detail, it kind of would ruin it. So just go read it. Just know that it's an amazing book. And the other one that we both read was American Gods, which is, I like to dub it the most beautifully written book about nothing.
A Neil Gaiman book.
Yeah, it's a Neil Gaiman book. Everybody's on Neil Gaiman now, with Good Omens airing on Amazon Prime. But it has a lot of, again, dead time, a lot of stuff.
Yes.
There's a lot of time where nothing happens, but you keep reading it because of some force that you can't describe.
True.
I just like how it's written, and nothing's happening through the majority of it.
It's a little dark, a little gruesome. Like most Gaiman books are a little more gothic than anything else. I wouldn't say this is his darkest, but it had a few moments where I had issues like reading it. There was this one scene where one character, I think, was like eating the heart of another, and I got so grossed out. I honestly felt sick, which I guess is good if you're going for gothic horror, but if you're a sensitive person like me, not so much.
Yeah. It had a lot of those like body horror things that you see
Yeah.
in horror movies, like slasher movies, but you don't see it a lot in books, but they describe a lot of like body horror, which is
What is this they? It's one author.
yeah, they. He describes a lot of body horror.
Yeah. You tried.
Beyond that, I have two other quick ones. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, which is I think I don't know if it's a novel or a novella. It's a short book by Stephen King, and it's about a girl who gets lost on the Appalachian Trail and kind of the struggle in her own head to try and keep going against the negative parts of her personality. Like she has this the persona that she views as negative Nancy, who's like the voice in her head that won't kind of let her uh, keep going forward and wants to tell her to stop and give up. And it's a really well done book. All of the things she encounters along the way, like she like falls on bees at one point. There's like a bear that's behind her, and they kind of all get wrapped up into her head and like dream sequences and visions and hallucinations. And it's a really well done book with a very simplistic premise. And the other one is a comedy book, a light book after all my gothic horror books.
I mean, really, Jared.
Yeah. America the Book, A Citizen's Guide to Democracy in Action, by Jon Stewart. It was his first published work, and it is my favorite comedy book ever. It's so funny, and it goes through the entire history of democracy from its foundations all the way up through where we are now, and in a very funny way, very easy to digest. I've listened to it. I like it on the audiobook version better than the regular version, because the regular version is like almost like an encyclopedia where there's like pictures and it shows them. It's like one of those kind of kids books almost. But I really like the audiobook version, and it's hilarious. So that's my last honorable mention.
Moment of truth, guys. We're gonna rank the non-honorable mentions. All right. So, do you want to, like last week, just find some space here, maybe like over here, and we'll just like move them up and down and all that stuff like last week. All right. So, first one is Holes. That will be our baseline. All right. Should we go through mine first and then yours? All right. Yours. So, Nimona, better or worse than Holes?
I've never read Holes, but
you said you read it in middle school.
Well, I did read it in middle school, but
so you lied.
It was so long ago that I don't remember the story.
Oh my god, this is hard because they're both amazing.
I would go for Nimona because I feel like you could appreciate it on different ages better than you could Holes.
I still love Holes. Okay, read that book. All right, then we have Dracula. And I feel like just because you like this gothic horror stuff, somehow it's going to wind up better than Nimona. But I feel like it's not quite as good as Nimona.
I don't know. I'd put it below Nimona. I like Nimona.
Better than Holes, though?
I don't know. It's a classic.
This is harder than last week, guys.
This is significantly harder because this is stuff we care about, not stuff that we dislike. I'm going to put it in between Nimona and Holes.
All right. I'll live with that decision. All right. And then the last one is The Time Machine. So I'm going to actually put that.
I think you have to rank that one.
Stop re-ranking things. You're wasting paper. Save the trees. Didn't the Lorax teach you anything? He didn't read that. Let's move on. Okay. The Time Machine, I think just because, I mean, just reading those few sentences with these like really awkward, like, very Victorian words is making me like it a little less just because it's confusing. So I'm going to put it at the bottom of my list. Also, I feel like it's a little niche. Like, not Victorian stuff isn't for everybody. You know, some people just need more modern stuff that's easy to understand.
Yeah, so, I mean, language is like how it kind of stands the test of time is kind of important.
I mean, I think it like stood the test of time. I just think the language can be a little awkward by today's standards. So what do we have for you right now?
For me, I know what my top book is out of mine.
I know.
I could probably rank it right here. What do I have, 5?
But we have to mix them together.
Yeah. Well, okay. For my top book would be Lost Souls. That I know that's like we can rank them separately and then kind of merge them together.
All right. So
Lost Souls, Shining. Where would I put? Ready Player One is probably the. No, I put that in front of Warbreaker. I think Warbreaker is my bottom one.
Okay.
Ready Player One. And what's the other one I talked about? Did I not write it down?
No, I think you were gonna talk about something else.
I was going to talk about Rhythmatist until I found out that Rhythmatist is part of a series. So
it's coming.
We even pulled it out. We have it sitting on the table.
we have proof. Wait, no, picked up the wrong one. Proof.
Yeah, but
we'll talk.
It's getting a sequel. We'll talk about that next week.
Yeah.
So Ready Player One.
All right. So I have read 2 of these books. And that was it, right?
I could have sworn I had 5, but I guess not.
No, you're talking about Lost Souls, Warbreaker.
That's it, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So if we were gonna add these, I think I'd put Ready Player One towards the bottom, just because A, it's niche, and B, not particularly well written. Sorry, Ernest Cline. He made it onto this list, though.
He did make it onto the list.
But
he made it onto the list mostly because I read predominantly series. So, and that's not this episode. I had to scrounge for standalone books.
I know, it's hard. Not a lot of standalone books.
There's not a lot of, especially not a lot of good ones.
Yeah, everything's a trilogy now.
They want to make money off of it. So
they can write different standalone books. Nothing's stopping them. All right, so we have the Lost Souls now. Where should we put that one?
I want Lost Souls towards the top. That inspired me as a writer. That carries some weight.
Maybe after Holes or after Dracula?
I think I can put it after Holes, just because I think it would appeal to less people.
Yeah, like me, not into that gothic stuff. Typically, horror, whatever's. So then we have The Shining and Warbreaker.
Warbreaker, I think, is at the bottom.
Really?
Or would you put it?
I would put it ahead of Ready Player One, honestly.
Okay. Warbreaker.
This list.
WB.
Okay, and then we have The Shining.
Shining is a classic. Like, I would rank it in my own personal self below Lost Souls, but in other people that have read horror and read Stephen King in general, Shining's held towards the top of Stephen King's books, and he's a very well-regarded author.
He's also written a bajillion books.
Yeah.
I don't know how he does it, but he does.
Yeah, he writes books about everything he sees.
And they make fun of him in Family Guy. Yeah. I'm going to tell a horror story.
Haunted lamp.
You're running out of ideas, aren't you? Yes. Get it to me by Tuesday. Yeah. Anyway, moving on.
I think that it should go, I'll put it after Dracula.
Okay. All right. Because Dracula is like super, super classic. All right. This is a messy list. Should we do a drum roll? Well, we must. Not the best drum roll, but we tried. Okay. Should we go bottom up or top to bottom?
Yeah, bottom up.
All right. So our worst ranked book is
Ready Player One.
Slightly better than that is
Warbreaker.
And then
Time Machine.
And then
Lost Souls.
And then
Holes.
And then
it's after Dracula. Then Shining.
And then
Dracula.
And then
Nimona.
So Nimona is the best book, and it's not even a traditional novel. It's a graphic novel. Kind of crazy.
What does that say about the state of traditional novels?
What does it say about us as human beings? I don't know. We'll find out one of these days.
Yeah. So next week, I think is going to be an interesting episode because we're doing series next week, right?
Yes, the best series, guys.
And I have a lot of those. I'm going to talk for a while.
I'm going to have like 1, and he's going to have like 30. So
it's going to be a very heavy Jeremy talk time episode.
Be prepared, guys. Scar has taught us something. It's to be prepared. Anyway, thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for coming, Jer. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Have a great night.